you guys know that I've been doing coverage of Rowan yarns, and today is going to be the designer spotlight, and my guest is Martin Storey, who is a designer for Rowan. Welcome to my channel, Martin.
Thank you very much, and very happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I've heard that you grew up on a farm, right?
That's correct, yes. I was brought up in the East Yorkshire, east of England, and close to the sea, and it was a family farmed by my father, his brother, and his sister as well. So it was a shared farmhouse of three families, essentially. So that having that upbringing in the country was fantastic. It was a really great and memorable childhood.
Were any of your family members knitters when you were growing up?
Yes. Big influence. My mum was always knitting my sweaters and cardigans for school from an early age, and similarly both my aunts as well, who lived on the farm. So that was always in the background when I was growing up, and obviously, I loved wearing the knits, and I just enjoyed watching the process of them knitting. So I think through sort of osmosis, I decided I wanted to learn to knit at an early age. But that it was more when I started junior school that I started knitting, and then my mum and my aunt sort of helped me along the way. But in fact, up until even into their old age, they were still knitting projects. Mum, of course, was enjoying knitting my own projects up until recently. So yes, it was always very much there.
Was that part of the school curriculum where they taught you how to knit?
Yes, absolutely. That then, growing up in the 1960s, art, craft, and music was very much part of the curriculum. I'm so glad it was, because I really thrived in that sort of environment. And also, I think actually craft and art and music is another discipline, but teaches a lot about. It's all about mathematics and numbers and measuring, and I think that's helped me along the way, because I struggled with maths. But art and craft and music, it wasn't just sort of like an hour a week or something. It was very much part of our day-to-day class routine, as well as learning to read and write, and that went right through until I went on to a local grammar school. So I had that 6 years of knitting and sewing and music as well. So fantastic. So I mean, it's such a shame that we don't have that included in the curriculum now, because I think it's so important from all sorts of skill levels to have that, to be able to enjoy that while still developing at school.
One of the things I talked to David MacLeod about is that whole stigma of being a male knitter, which is ironic because knitting used to be purely male-dominated field, and women were not allowed into the knitting guilds like in the early days.
Yeah.
Did you feel that, like, growing up? Did you feel like knitting was not for boys?
I think because we were all knitting, boys and girls, at junior school, there was no real stigma at that point. It's when I went to grammar school, to an all-boys grammar school, and that was, knitting was very much anything that seemed as a girly craft was a no-no. So I guess I kind of put that to a side for a number of years, until I actually picked it up again when I went to art school. But certainly at junior school, no, I never felt, because, as I say, we were all boys and girls together, knitting and doing everything together as a group. But unfortunately, going to an all-boys grammar school didn't help my knitting career at that stage. But I'm glad I came back to it later.
Well, tell me why you came back later. How did that happen?
It was kind of it was really a friend of mine. I don't know if you're familiar with the hand knit designer Patricia Roberts, who was very popular in the late 70s and 80s. And I think she kind of revolutionized hand knitting because she had a very different idea of design in hand knitting, and was doing some fantastic and wonderful things and textures and colors. And there's a friend of mine who was actually at art school before I went to my local art school initially. His girlfriend, who was and still is a very keen knitter, I'm still in touch with her all these years later, and she knitted him the Patricia Roberts cherry and grape slipover. And I was so desperate, I so coveted it and desperate to have it, that the only way I was going to get it was to actually knit it myself. So having not little experience other than stocking stitch, I bought the book and bought the yarn. I couldn't afford the Patricia Robert yarn. It was out at the time, but I used a Peyton's Beehive, which was a very popular DK yarn at that time. And I spent the whole summer knitting it. And actually, it came very easily. I was surprised how I didn't have any issue with, reading charts and understanding the instructions, because I'd never knitted bobbles or done any shaping or anything up until that point. I'd only knitted sort of very basic things. And it got me kind of thinking, well, I really, I love doing this, and maybe not necessarily knitting, but I could maybe think about possible a career in design or art or fashion or something. And that actually led me on, that piece of knitting led me on to getting a place at on an art foundation course, local course, and which led on to me doing a degree in fashion and textiles. But that's at that point, that's why I came back into knitting, and I carried on knitting and making things for friends, because I was wearing all these nice knitting, and they were asking me to knit for them. And then eventually, when I went to art school, I brought hand knitting into my final degree collection. I did a range of hand knitted. Well, there were hand knitted dresses and very strange constructed shapes at the time, and then after graduating, I then decided to focus very much on the knitting side of things. So from that Patricia Roberts sweater, it took me right through my art school up until working with a design team based in London. So I've got a lot to thank Patricia for encouraging me to get back into knitting.
Well, I want to ask you a difficult question, and one that I often ask guests of my channel. You've been designing for all these years. What constitutes an original design in your mind?
Well, I think an original design in my mind is, I don't know, I don't think anything's entirely original. I mean, I've said this in previous interviews, I do an awful lot of research, and it could be anything. And I think sometimes, just something or someone will spark just an idea. It might be just sort of a texture that I think would work in knitting, or a pattern or a color that's not knit necessarily from knitting. It might be from fabric or something, but it's a sort of an original interpretation, I guess, of things. But sometimes original ideas do come out of the blue as well, because I don't know about my fellow designers, but as a designer, I'm constantly thinking about ideas for the Rowan brochures and magazines I work on, and also for my website. And I think because you're sort of in that mindset the whole time, that sometimes ideas just come from just sort of just to appear out of the ether, as it were. But I think it's all original ideas, whether you call them original ideas or interpretations. For me, that are always sparked off by something, you know, that I've seen when I've been on my travels, or just, you know, I'm observing constantly everything that's going on around me to influence my design. So
when you're getting inspired, let's say you see a piece of fabric or like a kilim rug that you like, oh, that would be like brilliant in knitting. Do you think in terms of what garment that would look good? Is it better for children, men, women, or like how do you store those ideas and how do they become what they become in the final stage?
Right. Well, yes, they do kind of ideas do lend themselves, you know, for me, suggest that they should go into such a, you know, a certain shape, or they'd work particularly well for women or men. I mean, men are very design specific about not only the colors that they work, but also the textures and the patterning. So it's kind of quite easy to separate those out. And obviously for children, you know, I love very colorful, bright, sort of quite quirky things, and which work really well for children. But going back to what you were saying, I do a huge. I think it's because of my fashion background, because originally as I say, I studied fashion. It was drummed home that we should do our research. So I always have lots and lots of, I'm always collating research, and that could be anything. It could be sort of something I've seen in a magazine, or fabric, or something I've even seen online. And I keep all that. Keep all that together, and it might not necessarily get used that particular season, but I know that's an idea that I think might work somewhere in the mix. So you know, if you see my studio, in fact, I've just had to have a huge clear out because I've just got boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of ideas and swatches as well that I've worked on, because obviously, you know, things you've got to test if an idea will work in knitting and so in swatch form. So and that's how I work. I don't kind of just sit there, you know, with a blank piece of paper and a pen and a pair of needles and think, what am I going to do now? I've always got something that I can that I've already sort of had bubbling away in the background, or, you know, I've got reference for it. So it's the design process for me is something that I don't struggle with, because you know, because of my fashion design background. You know, you're having to put collections together overnight practically, so you had to have ideas. You couldn't just sort of, you know, the pressures of fashion design is so fast moving. You need to be sort of looking and observing, and getting those ideas anyways. Having done it for so long, it all kind of falls into place automatically now without me having to kind of really think about it. And, you know, and I kind of know, if it works as a swatch, I kind of know where it's going to go, where it's going as a garment shape as well, and whether it's going to go into a, you know, women's brochure, or men's, or unisex, or children's, or even accessories as well, because obviously we do an awful lot of home and wearable accessories now, which are quite, you know, becoming a big thing in our knitwear collections.
Let me ask you this, like when you talk about fashion, right, like the runway fashion, you mentioned that it's like very quickly changing.
Yes.
And then when you talk about a company like Rowan, the design takes, like, until it's being published, it can take 18 months to 2 years, like I've heard. Does that ever frustrate you that you can't immediately like have your idea published and knitted?
Yes, and I think there's a danger of sometimes it being published too, you know, the idea being too early as well. That's always a thing, and that's true in fashion as well. You know, the public haven't quite caught up. I think for hand fashion sort of is I think my fashion background has taught me to think on my feet. But I realize with hand knitting, it's got to be sort of fashionable, but also people, by the time the brochure goes out and they knit it, they want to have it in their wardrobe for a long time. So it's not having a fashion statement piece necessarily, but with something with a bit of a fashion influence, but then has got that longevity. So it becomes like a fashion classic, which is pretty much what I'm more about. So I know that that sweater hopefully will be worn for a good many years rather than just being worn for one season and then discarded. So you have to be mindful of that as well. You need to bring a bit of fashion into knitwear because there are fashions in knitwear. We see that, but we also have to make sure that the knitter, once she's knitted it's not going to be out of date. It's still relevant, and maybe she might put it away for a few years, but then it'll come, she'll start wearing it again when, that cycle comes round again. So it's fine. It's sort of kind of fine tuning it. And I think as well, if you can, going back to your question about originality in design, if it's original, and there's, you're not going to see anybody else kind of wearing that design, then that's something that people are going to wear that because it's kind of unique in its own right.
Well, we sort of skipped how you got to work at Rowan. Let's go back to that part. How did you get that gig?
Well, I was working when I graduated. I started working with a wholesale hand knit company called Artwork, based in London, and actually they were using Rowan yarns for their collections. We're using the hand knit cotton, which, gosh, that must have been in the range for nearly 40 years now, and also some of the Rowan DK, because they had such a fantastic range of colours. And then we shortly after I joined the company, we were approached by this guy who was developing the denim knitted yarn, which you're probably aware of. It's no longer in the range. And he'd also approached Rowan with the same yarn. And so Artwork and Rowan sort of kind of worked jointly on the denim project because Rowan wanted to have it in their range, and obviously Artwork wanted to use it for their wholesale range. And because of that, Stephen Sheard, who was then the director owner of Rowan, used to come and visit the studio where I was working, and I got to know him and got talking, and he saw my knit work that I was doing at the time for Artwork, and he really liked the designs I was coming up with. And eventually I was talking about going freelance, and he said, "Oh, would you be interested in doing some freelance design for Rowan?" And that was in about 1992, say. I can't remember what magazine that was, where I came in then as a freelance designer. And so I was freelancing for Rowan and Artwork and a few other companies at the time for a number of years, and that carried on, just doing a few designs for Rowan each season for the magazine. And then in 2001, I just happened to see that Rowan were advertising they wanted 2 designers to join the team full time, one for Jaeger, which we had a license for, Jaeger and Jaeger yarns, and Paytons as well, which were then run. Rowan were involved in putting the Paytons collections together, and I approached them and said, "Well, I'd be interested in the Jaeger yarn and the Jaeger collection, designing it." And to cut a long story short, it took a few months of talking and toing and froing and missed phone calls and things, and eventually I started working with Rowan full time in 2001, but on the Jaeger range, and then I carried on designing the Jaeger range and Jaeger yarns until it decided that Rowan and Jaeger parted company. And then I just stayed on then as one of the Rowan design team, working with that. Well, that was when Kim Hargreaves was the in-house designer, and then obviously working with Marie Wallin, and then now with Lisa Richardson and Georgia Farrell and Sarah Hatton as well. I also worked with, so I sort of seen a few changes, but I think essentially I worked freelance for about 10 years, and now I've been working with them as a full-time contracted designer for just over 20 years.
I looked at your Ravelry page, and there is 2,100 and something designs just on Ravelry, right?
Oh my God.
And it sort of blows my mind, because you mentioned in one of the interviews that you do like north of 100 designs per year.
Yeah. Explain
me that process. Like, what does that mean? How is it physically possible? How do you do it?
It's physically possible because I'm allowed to just focus on the design. So I'm coming up with the actual the fabric, the idea for the fabric, whatever that may be, what like cable I'm wearing or the scarf I'm wearing. So I'm coming up primarily with the swatch and all the first pattern, the technical spec, and then Rowan now have a really good team of pattern writers and graders and checkers, and so I don't have to get involved in that process. Otherwise, it wouldn't be physically possible to do all that design. But actually, the design, I was saying, the design process is something that I really, and still do really enjoy. So I'm always putting ideas together. It's not a problem for me to come up with, I don't do hunt. I used to, when I first started working with Rowan, I used to the first Jaeger publications and some of the first Rowan publications, then we were producing a huge amount. I think at one point I was producing up to 8 or 9 collections, brochures a year, which was a pretty tall order, and doing sort of the first tech spec and pattern for that was but it's not quite as because of age and energy, it's not quite as demanding as that. But I think it's like in any job, whether you're a doctor or a nurse, you're in that mindset anyway. So you're able to react. Well, I'm able to react. I spend all my time putting design ideas together and proposing them to Rowan as well. So it's not something I can say that I particularly struggle with on the design and swatch side. And I've got, I do a lot of I do some of the swatching, and I've got a knitter I've been working with since my artwork days who does swatching and sampling for me as well. So I've got the team around me to make it possible. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I couldn't do the whole process on my own. It would be, it just wouldn't be physically or mentally possible to do that. So I'm very grateful I've got that support behind me.
Well, when I'm thinking about like creative people throughout history, like I'm thinking about Bach, right? And he used to write something new for every church service, basically. So there would be a new piece of music coming out at least every week, and sometimes more often than that. And that was his job. Like, it wasn't that he was sitting and thinking, what's going to inspire me today? He had to come up with a new piece of music for the next weekend, right? And today we look at that music and it's, we consider it masterpieces, each and every piece of that music. When you look at your designs, do you feel like because you have to design so many designs, like, are they all masterpieces? Are they all gonna be masterpieces? Or do you feel like does it push you outside of your limits, or does it dilute your creativity? Like, what's your feeling about it?
I think it'd be impossible to produce a masterpiece every time. I think there's masterpieces in it. I think in all the collections there's always a masterpiece that I'm very, very happy with, and then really around that I sort of build good, we need some good staple design as well. We don't want just all masterpieces. We want sort of, garments that have some knittability and not too complex for the knitter as well. Obviously, when you look back at a collection, you think, oh yes, if I did that now, I would do X, Y, and Z. I'd tweak this and tweak that. But on the whole, I'm kind of, I'm always on the whole, 90% of the time or 80% of the time, I'm pretty happy with what I'm producing. But of course, it's being in fashion craft industry, it's fast moving, and we're having to work, as you said earlier, we're having to work almost a year ahead. So there is the pressure there to but to come up with good sellable ideas. But I'm can't there's always going to be a few designs that, as I say, could have, had I had a little bit more time, I could have improved on. But I think as well, I've just got used to thinking on my feet anyway. And kind of have a bit of an idea now what works and what doesn't. Even more so now, I should do. After being in this industry for 40 years, I should have some idea of what works and what doesn't work, and we're also, we're getting feedback all the time on that anyway. So all the time we're refining it and making sure that whatever the designs we're coming up with are workable for both Rowan and for the knitter as well. So it's always a work in progress, I would say.
Does it ever frustrate you that it's not just about like some brilliant idea that you had in the shower that day and that you can come and do it, but like you have to think about like, well, is there the right customer for it? Is it going to be popular? Is it going to sell? Like, does that ever frustrate you?
It can be frustrating because obviously you'd want to, I would do much more complex things than, which is where when I was at artwork, and because we were it was more of wholesale hand knitting, we could go crazy. I mean, we were knitting things with thousands of beads on and sequins but that's kind of not, a little bit of that, a little element of that is good for Rowan, but it's not, for people. You do kind of have to think about the end user, the knitter, and making sure she's getting something very exciting, but she's not getting bogged down with the actual process of knitting it. Because knitters sort of feel like the knitting's taking over, they'll tend to put it aside. It'll go into their queue, and might not get knitted at all, or not they might not go back to it for a long time. So you have, again, it's that balance really of coming up with some, if you can come up with some really exciting technique which is not too demanding but is very effective. More recently we're having to think about knitters wanting to knit in the round, not wanting, particularly when they're doing stranded colour work, because they don't want to do strand on the reverse, when you're knitting flat and purl. So that's me. Again, and I think what I like is I kind of enjoy rising to the challenge of that. So it's not so much frustrating. It's like, okay, then let's see how I can make this work. This is what you're telling me, so I'm going to give you something that you want, but done in my way. So yeah.
Let me ask you about that, because right now at the moment, and if you guys want to join this knit along, I highly recommend it. It's a super fun event. So right now you started the knit along for a blanket, or it can be a pillow. So there's like squares that you need, which is Fair Isle stranded colorwork knitted flat. So was that one of your way to trick people into doing something that they're afraid of doing, and show them on a smaller size project that it's actually doable and it's not that hard?
Exactly. Well, I'm saying here's another skill that, you know, if you would like to learn it, it's useful to have, particularly for doing something like a motif stranded blanket, because obviously, you know, it could be, you know, some knitters I see are actually doing it using steeks to create their blankets. But we also have to think about that these projects are for beginner knitters. So it's a good introduction for a beginner who's just starting on their stranded colourwork journey to get the feel, and the basics of doing that. And I think this, you know, just doing it in a little square rather than doing a whole garment is a really good way around that. And actually, you know, if you go back even 10, 20 years, everybody, you know, knitting in the flat, not knitting in the round, was really the dominant form of knitting. You know, if you go back to some of, I've got lots of lovely Fair Isle pattern books in my collection going back to the 1940s, 50s. Everything was knitted flat, so you were doing it on the knit and purl side. There was, you know, there was
no circular needles.
No circular knitting, none of that. So, and that's kind of where I come from. I mean, for me to think in the round is that it's getting there, but slowly. Some flat knitting has relevance, you know, not only in the knit along project now when we're doing this, you know, doing a little square isn't like, as I say, doing a whole garment flat, knitted flat stranded colour work. But, you know, also, you know, just sort of showing that flat knitting has a place as well in, you know, in constructing a garment, you know, particularly if you want to do something that's very fitted. I think something with seams actually works very, you know, works particularly for a tailored garment, works well for that. But I see a few comments on Facebook, you know, saying, oh, you know, people not wanting to carry the yarn on the purl side. But then I think once they've actually got into knitting the square, they're actually, you know, they're pleasantly surprised, I think, and I think they're quite enjoying it because they're coming up with a beautiful image, and they're going to end up with a fantastic, you know, a wonderful blanket. And, you know, imagine knitting all that in one and all these, you know, different colors, and it would be quite, you know, nightmarish to do it like that. But in the back of my head, you know, I think just, you know, as a sort of going forward in knit-alongs, and something, you know, if I do something similar along those lines, I might even go down the route of doing a steeked, knitted in the round and steeked blanket. That would be that's the next step. Once you know, we've got the square, we've got the hang of doing the stranded colour work. The next step it will be in the round and doing that. So that's you know, that's a bit of a sneak preview into what might be coming up in the future.
The good thing about the knit along is that you're putting out tutorials explaining how to do it, the particular techniques that being used in this knit along. And it also allows people to have a conversation with you. Whereas like if they just bought a pattern, they could probably not have that availability of you to like answer questions. Whereas during the knit along, they can chit chat with you as part of the Zoom meetings that you do. Is that a lot of extra work for you to run?
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, I enjoy so long, you know, as long as I don't get completely overwhelmed by it, because obviously I've still got my day job to do. I mean, we're right in the middle of designing autumn winter 24 now. We've just working on the magazine 76 briefs, so of course I have to give quite a bit of my time and attention to that, but and particularly now, I'm of an age where I can't multitask like I used to, but I'm happy, if people are okay with me just dipping in and talking to them online, that's fine. It's just I can't sort of get involved 24/7, unfortunately, just because of the demands of my own designing, and also I've got my own little website as well that needs attention, and knitters want to see new and exciting things anyway. So again, striking the balance, really making sure that I'm giving attention to the knit along group, but also making sure I've got enough time and energy to do my design job, because once we get into Rowan designing, it's very full on. It's sort of and we have deadlines to work to as well. We can't just sort of say, oh well, I'll send you some designs in a few weeks. It's like, no, this is the date that they're going to be selected, and then they come back to you to do all the technical work for it. But I as I say, knit along, so long as it's not controlling me, and I'm sort of I'm able just to come in with we're doing a catch up on the 7th, next Thursday. We're doing a catch up which is halfway through the knit along, just to see how knitters are progressing and to encourage people along as well. So we're doing things like that. We're coming in at certain stages, but the knit along group it sort of supports itself in many ways. It's
brilliant
in that respect.
I see beautiful, because people get to make friends and they each help each other also.
Absolutely, yeah.
And yes, I just want to make sure that this interview is being posted in the beginning of September, but the knit along started mid-August. It's still gonna continue until October, right? So people just want to join now, they still can join now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, all the patterns are the first 2 releases are available to download now, and they're free to download. We've got the first of the snowflake squares, and we've just released a stag square last week, and there's a snowflake square being released this coming Thursday. We have 2 tutorials that Kerry's put together for the first snowflake and for the stag, which includes a bit of intarsia and stranded colour work, and then we've got a catch up next week with everybody, and then we do have a casting off party on the 12th of October, which is when the knit along concludes. But I see, and a few people are just joining in now. But there's no pressure. To you catch up in your own time. I think people are
also makes a perfect Christmas gift. This
yes, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's what people are wanting, to actually get a blanket or a cushion at least ready for themselves or for a gift. So the sooner you can join in, the better, really. But I'm seeing people are already ready for the next release. They've got their first and second release squares already knitted up. So yeah, I think people are actually enjoying the process, and that makes them want to carry on.
It's
so
really
that's
a beautiful
a good
blanket. I saw it, pictures of it, and it's really beautiful.
Yes, no, I was delighted that that came. The blanket idea came out of the Christmas collection that we've just launched online. I think we launched it a couple of weeks ago. It's a multi-designed collection with myself and Lisa and Georgie and Chloe, and that was one of the designs that I presented for the Christmas collection. And it was like, I think this would make a really nice knit along project. We haven't really done a color color work as such in that way, and doing it in squares.
I think it's a brilliant idea. Actually, it's a perfect project for a knit along, and it's also a perfect project to make.
And
make it in more colors.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, you can make it as small, you can adjust it to fit your requirements as well. I notice people are already deciding to, some of them have already flipped the stag, so they've got stags sort of symmetrical facing each other on their blankets and cushions, and sort of adding in their little extra quirks, which is what it's all about. We want to encourage people to to make it personal to them, and and hopefully they might start adding their own design element into that, because that's kind of what hand knitting. I see always see lots of variations of my designs throughout the years, whether it's just in by colorway, or they've sort of added or tweaked it, or that's a joy of hand knitting.
Well, that's probably also your ultimate joy, to see people use your ideas in their own way, to just see how the endless possibilities of your designs.
Yes, no, it is. It's great. I mean, sometimes it's like, why didn't I think of that? And some of the colorways, particularly, that people come up with are fabulous. Some really, as I say, if I'd had that idea, I would have made sure it was knitted in those particular colors. But also, I think they're just maybe an element of my design, or one of my Rowan fellow designers. If that sparks something off, then that's great. At least they've sort of, I'm still being recognized as an inspirational designer, as well as as designing for Rowan and myself. So no, it's great.
Let me ask you this question. So Rowan, we all know and love for their yarns. Do you have a favorite? Is there something that you like? If you had to go to deserted island, what would be the one you bring with you?
Oh gosh, it's difficult to say. Well, I use an awful lot of felted tweed, and I think probably all the design team would say the same, because it's so versatile, and the color range is so fantastic. If I'm doing color work, I'm always so kind of drawn back to felted tweed, because it has all the colours that I want in there, because we've now got all those fantastic bright jewel colours that I think Kaif introduced a few seasons ago, and they've become very much part of that. And I love knitting with it as well. I enjoy, it does what I want it to do, which is important. It's crucial to me for design, is to have a versatile yarn that can do everything, because it works very well in texture and lace too. But I do also like, which is one of David's favorite yarns, I think, Softjack DK. I like working with that. And again, it's got the versatility, a nice soft color range, sort of summer soft color range, and it's never it's never doesn't disappoint me in terms of the actual structure of the knitting. It always looks beautiful when it's knitted up. But likewise, I've been working, probably less popular yarns with the knitters, but which are made in the UK, Murdale and what's the other one, Pebble Island. I mean, they're beautiful. They're beautiful yarns to knit with, and a lovely color range too. And they for color work, and similarly for color work and texture. But if I had to go to a desert island with one yarn, I think it would be felted tweed. I'm afraid to say, a bit boring to say felted tweed, but yeah, I'm afraid it would be. I don't think I couldn't get bored with knitting that and coming up with lovely colorful ideas. So yeah.
You've been working in this industry for 40 years. You've been working with Rowan for so long. How do you think Rowan has changed you?
It's made me a better designer, that's for sure, because I think, as I say, with art, when I was working with artwork, which was very much more about fashion knitting, and you know, as I say, the world was your oyster in terms of design. You didn't really have to think about the knitting process as such, because it was all wholesale knitting. But Rowan has taught me a lot about technical skills and actually construct, not only the design to a certain extent, but the way a knitting pattern is put together, and how a garment structure as well. That was something I know Rowan have always been quite mindful of, because obviously we're having to, I didn't really get involved prior to Rowan. I didn't get involved in, I was doing some pattern writing, but not in the way that I've been doing since working with Rowan, and the grading aspect as well, and actually making sure that it fits, the sweater actually fits, it's so all the sort of Rowan has taught me some of the elements of design, as in how, design, translating a design into actually an actual written pattern, a graph, and sort of, and just little finishing touches as well, which I hadn't sort of considered before, constructing, making beautiful raglans, and how just little ways of casting on and casting off, that type of thing. But very much so about it more, as I say, more on the sort of technical aspect, because obviously, that's pretty important. It's, as I say, it's all well, it's fine coming up with a beautiful design, but you've got to make it work in a shape or some sort of accessory. So I've learned an awful lot about construction since working with Rowan, and then again, that's something we're refining all the time, and responding to, as I was saying, talking about working in the round more and more, and top down. That's another big, learning curve, particularly for me, for somebody who has always knitted. I mean, I always will continue to design flat, because that's kind of my signature design, but more and more, we're getting demand for, there's a big movement, particularly growing movement, for seamless knitting, and because people, so if they don't want to spend hours sewing up their knitting pieces. So it's that kind of more construction technical side that I've grown with Rowan, and to be honest, I'm still learning as well. It's sort of knitting. The process of knitting has become quite important, as well as the design now. Some people like a sort of technical challenge, but in without the sewing kind of aspect of it. So we're it kind of, that's sort of how Rowan are sort of growing and developing as well, because we do, to survive, we have to, make sure that we give the knitters what they want to knit, as well as what they didn't think they wanted to knit. That's that's another thing, to sort of, you think, you can sort of just, get the feedback and say, yeah, let's go in that direction. But then there's always, they want to, there's a element of surprise as well. So, something I think, I think we should just slip that in, whether, it might be completely way left field, but actually they're like, actually, yes, we like this. I think we'll knit this too. So you have, it's always good to have something that comes along that is unexpected and doesn't particularly fit into what we're being asked to do. I think it's quite good to keep to have that in the mix of the designs as well.
Well, when I was interviewing Kay Fawcett, he has been with Rowan from almost the very beginning. And then Rowan has younger designers that they like Georgia Farrell, right? Are you concerned about your longevity in this company? And I love that about Rowan, that there is like this mixture of like very seasoned designers and younger designers. Are you ever concerned?
It's not something that I kind of stopped to think about. Obviously, I'm 65 now, and I've been doing, as I say, been doing it for over 40 years, this role. But I think there's room for everybody, definitely. The people, I think we've all got fans out there who, they're all people who are going to knit caves, designs, whatever. And similarly, myself and Lisa and the younger up and coming generation. But that's a good thing. I mean, for Knitting Survive, we need a young generation of hand knit designers out there now, to keep it alive and fresh and coming up with new ideas. And I think it's great that there's the choice as well, because if Chloe and Georgia and Lisa have their strengths, different strengths that they bring as well as their own interpretation of design. And I think that's quite a good thing. So there's something for everyone. If a knitter's frustrated she can't find what she wants from myself, then obviously Lisa and Chloe and Georgia are likely to have a design that they want to knit. And I mean, I was in that position as well once upon a time. I was just starting out and sort of doing my own thing, and I don't want to discourage. I would never discourage. I will keep going until people stop knitting my designs. I think that's Cave's idea on design. If people want him and want his designs, and he'll keep on producing them. So but I think I definitely, there's lots of good young designers out in America and in Europe too. You've got Stephen Weston, who's doing fantastic things. But in his own way, it's completely different to what I do. So it's not like we're all, one size fits all. We're all doing our own thing and interpreting things in our own way, and that's hopefully keeping it fresh and alive.
Definitely. I'm so grateful that you agreed to be my guest today, because I loved hearing your side of the Rowan story. And I think it's very interesting and very important to hear the designer who worked for so long with Rowan and how you still see all these things in your future. Are you ever afraid to run out of ideas? Or do you think like those files that you saved, like, is it enough for another like 3 lifetimes?
There's always more ideas. There's ideas on top of ideas. That's absolutely. I just love I love the creative process. That's always been my thing. All through my career is coming up with new and interesting ideas. That's never been the issue. I mean, I might struggle with other aspects of knitting, not on the design side, but just the day-to-day stuff that you have to do, but never on the design side. No. And I was when I was at art school, I was the same. I just relished coming up with some new and interesting way, new spin on things, I should say. Sort of, I suppose it's like reinventing yourself all the time, but also, do it by doing that, other ideas come along as well. So I'm never, I don't think my designs, are going to, are ever going to dry up or be exhausted. I think I will always be, even if I stop designing for hand knit, I'd be designing for myself still, or doing other projects, at home. So
I hope you'll never stop. I hope you're going to continue with your design process, because you're doing beautiful things and you're making this world wonderful.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for that. That's very kind of you to say that. That's really heartwarming to hear. Thank you.
And thank you for being my guest today. That was lovely to chat with you.
Yes, and lovely to chat with you too. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'm going to put all the links to the Knit Along and to Rowan Connect in the description of this video. So if you guys want to join that, it's not too late. Just click on that Rowan Connect button, subscribe for their newsletter, and learn more about all these wonderful people who I'm introducing you to from Rowan. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Irina. Yes, hope to catch up again sometime soon. Yeah.
Thank you.